Crescent Moon, The Last Light at Pine Hollow, 1897. Part 1, The Letter in the Snow. December had arrived early that year. By the second week of the month, the forests of northern Maine were already covered in a thick blanket of snow. The roads had almost disappeared beneath the white landscape. The small streams had frozen over. And after sunset, the entire countryside became strangely quiet. There was one road, however, that still carried travelers through the winter wilderness. It was an old mail road. For more than 30 years, the road had connected the small villages scattered throughout the pine forests. Most people avoided it during winter. But Elias Morgan had traveled that road for nearly 20 years. He was a postal courier. Elias was a quiet man. He did not speak much, and he rarely complained about the weather. Over the years, he had learned something important about winter. Snow could hide a road, but it could never erase a promise. That evening, Elias was riding alone. His horse moved slowly through the deep snow. The leather straps of his mailbag creaked with every step. Above him, the sky was dark blue. There were no clouds, only thousands of bright stars. The cold was sharp enough to make every breath visible. Elias pulled his wool coat tighter around his shoulders. Then, he looked at the small pocket watch in his hand. It was 5 minutes past 6. He still had nearly 2 hours before reaching the next settlement. Normally, that would not have worried him. But tonight was different. A storm was coming. He could feel it in the wind. Somewhere beyond the mountains, thunder rolled softly through the darkness. Elias looked toward the horizon. Nothing could be seen. Only endless rows of pine trees, standing dark against the snow. He gently pulled the reins. "Come on, old girl." The horse moved a few more steps. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Elias frowned. "What is it?" The horse lowered its head. Its ears pointed toward the forest. Elias became still. He listened carefully. At first, he heard nothing. Then, he heard a faint sound. It was almost like the cry of a distant bird. The sound came again. This time, Elias realized it was not a bird. It sounded like something wooden striking against something else. Knock. A short pause. Then another knock. Elias looked toward the trees. There was nothing there. He waited. The sound did not return. Elias slowly shook his head. It must be the wind. The horse finally continued along the road. A few minutes later, Elias reached the old wooden bridge that crossed a narrow river. The bridge was almost completely covered in snow. He stopped the horse before crossing. Something caught his attention. A small envelope was lying in the snow. It was perfectly white. Except for one thing. A dark red wax seal. Elias climbed down from the horse. He picked up the envelope. It was strangely warm. He turned it over. There was no return address. No town. No name. Only 4 words were written across the front. To be delivered by hand. Elias stared at the envelope. That was unusual. Very unusual. Mail was rarely delivered without an address. He examined the wax seal. A small pine tree had been pressed into the red wax. Beneath the pine tree was the letter P. Elias knew that symbol. Everyone in the region knew it. It belonged to an old settlement called Pine Hollow. But Pine Hollow had been abandoned nearly 20 years earlier. Elias had never been there. Most people had not. The settlement had once been a small logging community. Then, during the winter of 1878, something happened. No one talked about it anymore. Elias had heard the stories. A terrible storm. A missing family. And an old cabin that had been found completely empty. But stories changed with time. Elias had never believed them. Until tonight. He looked at the envelope again. Then, he noticed something else. A date was written in faded black ink. December 14th, 1878. Elias slowly lowered the letter. His heart began beating faster. That was impossible. The current year was 1897. The letter was 19 years old. And yet, it looked as though someone had placed it in the snow only moments ago. Elias looked around. The forest was silent. There were no footprints. No wagon tracks. No sign that anyone had been there. only untouched snow. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was careful and elegant. Elias held the paper closer to the lantern hanging from his saddle. He read the first line. Then, he stopped. His face became pale. The letter began with two simple words. Dear Mr. Morgan. Elias stared at his own name. He read the next line. If this letter has reached you, then the light at Pine Hollow is burning again. Elias slowly looked toward the dark forest. Far beyond the trees, somewhere deep in the mountains, a tiny yellow light appeared. It flickered once, then disappeared. Elias looked back at the letter. His hands were shaking now. There was only one more sentence on the page. He read it slowly. Please deliver this before the first snow melts. Elias folded the letter. He looked at his horse. Then, he looked at the road behind him. Finally, he turned toward the dark forest. The sensible choice was obvious. He should forget the letter. He should return to the main road. He should deliver the rest of the mail and tell no one what he had found. But Elias had spent 20 years carrying letters. He understood something that most people did not. A letter was a promise between two people. And sometimes, that promise survived longer than the people who had written it. Elias climbed back onto his horse. He turned toward the forest. The old Pine Hollow road had not been used in 19 years. Snow covered it completely. There was no sign that anyone had traveled there. Elias took one final look at the letter. Then, he placed it carefully inside his coat. Just one delivery, he whispered. The horse stepped forward. Into the forest. Behind him, the old bridge slowly disappeared into the falling snow. Ahead, the trees grew darker. The wind became colder. And somewhere in the distance, a small yellow light appeared again. It was waiting patiently in the darkness. Waiting for Elias Morgan. And perhaps, waiting for the letter that had been written 19 years ago. The Journey to Pine Hollow. Part 2, The Road Through the Pines. The old road disappeared beneath the trees. Elias Morgan followed it slowly, guiding his horse through the deep snow. The forest was different here. The pine trees stood closer together. Their branches were heavy with snow. Every now and then, a cold breeze moved through the branches, sending small clouds of powder drifting onto the road. Elias kept one hand on the reins. His other hand rested against his coat. The letter was still there. He could feel its folded edges against his chest. For several minutes, neither Elias nor the horse made a sound. Only the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves broke the silence. Step, crunch, step, crunch. Elias looked over his shoulder. The road behind him had already disappeared into darkness. He could no longer see the bridge. He could not even see the trail he had followed. For the first time that evening, he wondered if he had made a mistake. He reached into his coat and touched the envelope. The paper was still warm. That bothered him more than anything else. A 19-year-old letter should have been dry, brittle, and yellow with age. This one was almost new. Elias pulled it out again. He opened the envelope and looked at the handwriting. The words were still exactly as he remembered them. If this letter has reached you, then the light at Pine Hollow is burning again. He read the sentence twice. Then, he looked ahead. Nothing. Only trees. The road seemed to stretch endlessly into the forest. Elias placed the letter back inside his coat. He continued forward. After another 20 minutes, the road began to climb. The trees became taller. The snow became deeper. The horse struggled with every step. Elias finally stopped. He climbed down and walked beside the animal. Easy, he said quietly. The horse breathed heavily. Elias looked up at the sky. The stars were beginning to disappear. Thin clouds were moving across the moon. The storm was getting closer. He knew he could not stay in the forest for long. If the snow became heavier, he might lose the road completely. He checked his pocket watch. It was almost 7. He still had no idea how far Pine Hollow was. According to the old maps, the settlement was less than 6 miles from the main road. But those maps were nearly 20 years old. The forest could have changed. The road could have disappeared. And Pine Hollow itself might no longer exist. Elias climbed back onto the horse. He continued. A few minutes later, he noticed something unusual. There were footprints in the snow. Elias stopped immediately. The footprints were fresh. They crossed the road and disappeared between the trees. He climbed down. He knelt beside them. They were human footprints. One person, walking toward the north. Elias looked around. There was no sign of anyone. He followed the footprints with his eyes. They continued for perhaps 50 yards. Then they simply stopped. There was no return trail. Elias frowned. Someone had walked into the forest. But no one had walked back out. He stood slowly. A cold feeling moved through him. He looked at the horse. The animal was staring at the same trees. Its ears were raised. Elias took the lantern from the saddle. He held it higher. The light moved across the snow. Nothing. Only tall pine trees. Then, he heard something. A faint sound. From somewhere ahead. It sounded like a bell. One soft note. Then silence. Elias waited. Another note followed. Farther away this time. He knew that sound. It was an old handbell. People used to carry them in winter to guide travelers through heavy snow. But there should not have been anyone out here. Not tonight. Not on this road. Elias climbed back onto his horse. He decided not to follow the footprints. Instead, he stayed on the old road. The bell sounded once more. Then it stopped. The forest became silent again. A little later, Elias saw something between the trees. A wooden sign. It leaned to one side, almost buried in snow. He stopped beside it. He brushed away the snow with his glove. The faded letters became visible. Pine Hollow, 3 miles. Elias stared at the sign. He had reached the old settlement road. He looked down at his horse. 3 miles, he whispered. The horse moved forward. The forest became darker as evening turned into night. Snow began falling. At first, it was light. Small flakes drifted through the lantern's glow. Then more began to fall. Elias pulled his scarf higher around his face. The road narrowed. Branches scratched against his coat. The wind grew stronger. He could barely see more than a few yards ahead. Then, suddenly, the horse stopped. Elias nearly fell forward. What now? The horse refused to move. Elias looked ahead. There was something in the middle of the road. A wooden box. He climbed down. The box was small and covered in snow. There were no footprints around it. Elias slowly opened the lid. Inside was an old lantern. He stared at it. It was made of brass and glass. The metal was dark with age. But there was something strange about it. The lantern was still warm. Elias touched the glass. Then, he pulled his hand away. It was almost hot. He looked around the forest. There was no fire nearby. No house. No person. Nothing. Only snow. Elias lifted the lantern from the box. A small piece of paper was lying underneath it. He picked it up. There were only 3 words written on the paper. Follow the light. Elias read the words twice. Then, he looked ahead. At first, he saw nothing. Then, far between the trees, a tiny yellow light appeared. The same light he had seen earlier. Elias stood completely still. The light moved. Slowly. Deeper into the forest. Elias looked at his horse. The animal did not move. For several seconds, Elias considered turning back. Then, the light stopped. It waited between the trees. Elias placed the old lantern beside his saddle. He took the reins and slowly guided the horse forward. The snow continued to fall. The road disappeared behind them. And somewhere beyond the trees, the mysterious light was leading Elias toward Pine Hollow. Part 3, The House with No Footprints. The yellow light disappeared between the trees. Elias Morgan continued forward. His horse moved carefully through the deep snow. The old lantern hung from the side of the saddle. Although there was no flame inside it, a faint warmth still came from the glass. Elias did not understand it. He did not want to understand it. For now, he only wanted to reach Pine Hollow before the storm became too strong. The forest grew quieter with every step. There were no birds. No distant animals. Not even the sound of branches moving in the wind. Only the soft crunch of snow beneath the horse's hooves. Elias checked his pocket watch. It was almost 8 o'clock. He had been traveling for nearly 2 hours since leaving the main road. Then, suddenly, the trees began to thin. Elias stopped. Beyond the trees was a wide clearing. Snow covered everything. In the middle of the clearing stood several dark shapes. Buildings. Elias stared at them. Pine Hollow. He had finally reached it. The settlement looked exactly like the old photographs he had seen years ago. Small wooden houses. A general store. An old blacksmith shop. A church with a narrow tower. And, farther up the hill, a large wooden house. But something was wrong. There were no footprints. Not one. The snow around every building was perfectly untouched. Elias slowly climbed down from his horse. He looked at the nearest house. Its windows were dark. The front door was covered in frost. He walked closer. The wooden sign above the door was almost impossible to read. He brushed away the snow. The words became visible. Pine Hollow Inn. Elias stared at the building. An inn. That meant someone might still be living here. He walked up the steps. The wooden boards creaked beneath his boots. He raised his hand. Then stopped. There was no reason to knock. If the town had been abandoned 19 years ago, the inn should have been empty. But the letter had told him that the light at Pine Hollow was burning again. Elias looked toward the windows. One window on the second floor was glowing faintly. A warm yellow light. The same light he had been following. He took a slow breath. Then, he knocked. 3 times. Knock. 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 Nothing happened. Elias waited. He knocked again. This time, the door opened. Very slowly. An old woman stood behind it. She was wearing a long grey dress and a dark wool shawl. Her hair was completely white. She looked at Elias without surprise, almost as if she had been expecting him. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then, the woman said, "You are late." Elias frowned. Late? The woman stepped aside. "You were supposed to arrive before dark." Elias looked at the road behind him. "I am sorry. The snow slowed me down." The woman looked past him. Her eyes moved toward the forest. Then, she looked at the lantern hanging from his saddle. Her expression changed. For the first time, she seemed frightened. "Where did you get that?" Elias looked at the lantern. "I found it on the road." The woman stepped closer. "Did you light it?" "No." "Did anyone give it to you?" Elias shook his head. "I found it inside a wooden box." The woman stared at him. Then, she whispered, "Then it has chosen you." Elias did not know what to say. The woman opened the door wider. "Come inside." Elias hesitated. The woman looked directly into his eyes. "You have traveled a long way." Elias stepped into the inn. The door closed behind him. Warm air surrounded him. A large fireplace burned at the far end of the room. The fire was bright. The room smelled of wood smoke and old pine. For the first time in hours, Elias felt the cold leave his body. He looked around. The furniture was old. Very old. There were several wooden chairs. A long dining table. An old clock on the wall. And above the fireplace was a large photograph. Elias walked closer. The photograph showed the people of Pine Hollow. Men. Women. Children. They stood together in front of the inn. Elias counted them. There were more than 30 people. The photograph looked old. But something caught his attention. One man in the photograph was holding a small lantern. The same kind of lantern Elias had found outside. Elias turned toward the old woman. "Who are these people?" She looked at the photograph. "The people who lived here." "What happened to them?" The woman did not answer. Instead, she walked toward the fireplace. "You should eat first." Elias looked at the photograph again. There was something strange about it. Everyone was looking at the camera. Except one person. A young girl stood near the back. She was looking toward the forest. Elias leaned closer. The girl seemed familiar. He did not know why. "Who is she?" The old woman became completely still. After a moment, she answered, "Her name was Clara." "Is she still alive?" The woman looked into the fire. "No." Elias felt a strange chill. He looked again at the photograph. The girl was holding something in her hands. A letter. Elias reached inside his coat. His fingers touched the envelope. The same thought came into his mind. He took it out. The old woman saw it. Her face became pale. "You brought it?" Elias nodded. "It was addressed to me." The woman slowly walked toward him. "May I see it?" Elias handed her the letter. She did not open it. She simply looked at the date. December 14th, 1878. Her hands began to tremble. Then, she whispered, "I thought it was gone forever." Elias stared at her. "What is this letter?" The woman looked toward the upstairs window. Then, she said, "It was written by Clara." Elias felt his heart stop for a moment. He looked at the photograph again. The young girl, the letter, the lantern, everything suddenly seemed connected. But before he could ask another question, the old clock on the wall began to move. Tick, tick, tick. The woman looked at it. Her face changed. "It is almost midnight." Elias frowned. "It is only 8. The woman shook her head. "Not that clock." She pointed toward the staircase. "Listen." Elias became silent. From somewhere upstairs, he heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, one step at a time. Someone was walking across the wooden floor. The old woman lowered her voice. "There is one room upstairs you must never enter." Elias looked toward the staircase. The footsteps stopped. Then came 3 slow knocks from behind a closed door. "Knock, knock, knock." The old woman whispered, "Whatever you hear tonight, Elias, do not open that door." Part 4. The lantern in the window. For several seconds, Elias stood completely still. The 3 knocks from upstairs seemed to remain in the air. Knock, knock, knock. Then, silence. Elias looked at the old woman. She had not moved. Her eyes remained fixed on the staircase. "What is behind that door?" Elias asked quietly. The woman did not answer. Instead, she walked toward the fireplace and added another piece of wood to the fire. The flames rose. The room became brighter. But Elias could still feel the cold. Not the cold from outside. Something different. Something that seemed to come from upstairs. The old woman finally spoke. "Some doors are better left closed." Elias looked toward the staircase. "I came here because of a letter." "I know. It was written 19 years ago." "I know that too. And it was addressed to me." The woman turned around. "That is what worries me." Elias frowned. "Why?" She looked at the envelope in his hand. "Because Clara never knew your name." Elias became silent. The woman walked slowly toward the table. She sat down. After a moment, Elias sat across from her. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind grew stronger. Snow struck the windows. Elias placed the letter on the table. "Tell me about Clara." The woman looked at the letter. "Clara was my daughter." Elias listened carefully. "She was 17 when Pine Hollow disappeared." "Disappeared?" The woman nodded. "People think the settlement was abandoned because of the storm." She paused. "That is not what happened." Elias waited. The woman continued. "On the night of December 14th, 1878, a terrible snowstorm came through the valley. That much I have heard. Everyone stayed inside their homes. The roads were blocked. The river froze. The wind was so strong that some of the roofs began to shake." She looked toward the window. But the next morning, something was wrong. "What?" "There were no footprints." Elias frowned. "No footprints?" "None. Even though people had been inside their houses." The woman nodded. "The doors were locked from the inside. Fires were still burning. Food was still on the tables." She looked directly at Elias. "But the people were gone." Elias stared at her. How many? All of them. He looked toward the photograph above the fireplace. 30 people. 32. Elias felt a chill. What about Clara? The woman looked down. She disappeared too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elias asked, "Were you here?" The woman slowly shook her head. "No. I don't understand. I left Pine Hollow the day before the storm." "Why?" The woman looked toward the staircase. "Because Clara asked me to." Elias leaned forward. What did she know? The woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she stood and walked to the old photograph. She touched Clara's face with one finger. She had been hearing something. What? A bell. Elias remembered the sound he had heard in the forest. His expression changed. What kind of bell? A small handbell. Elias looked at the old woman. "I heard one tonight." The woman slowly turned around. "You heard it?" "Yes." Her face became pale. "Then it has started again." Elias stood. "What has started?" The woman did not answer. She walked toward the window. The storm outside had become heavier. Snow covered the glass. Then, through the darkness, Elias saw a faint yellow light. It was moving. Slowly. Across the far side of the settlement. The woman closed the curtains. "Do not look at it." Elias stepped closer. "Why?" "Because it wants you to follow it." Elias looked at her. "Where?" The woman whispered. "To the church." Elias remembered the church tower he had seen outside. "Why would it want me there?" The woman looked at the letter. "Because Clara wrote the letter for someone who would come after her." Elias picked up the envelope. "Who?" The woman looked directly at him. "You." The room suddenly became very quiet. Then, somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Elias turned. The old woman closed her eyes. Another sound followed. A slow step. Then another. Someone was walking toward the staircase. Elias reached for the lantern. The old woman quickly grabbed his arm. "Don't." Elias looked at her. "Who is upstairs?" She shook her head. "You don't want to know." The footsteps stopped. Silence returned. Then, a soft voice came from upstairs. A girl's voice. "Mother?" The old woman froze. Elias looked at her. Her eyes filled with tears. The voice came again. "Mother, are you there?" The woman whispered, "Clara." Elias felt the hair on his arms rise. The old woman covered her mouth. The voice continued, "Please open the door." Elias looked toward the staircase. The old woman shook her head. "No." The voice became softer. "Mother, I'm cold." The woman began to cry. Elias stood beside her. "Is that really your daughter?" The woman looked at him. "I don't know." The voice stopped. For several seconds, there was complete silence. Then the sound of footsteps returned. But this time, they were moving away. Slowly. One step at a time. Until they disappeared. Elias waited. The old woman wiped her eyes. "You should sleep," she said. "I don't think I can." "You will." She pointed toward a small room beside the fireplace. "There is a bed inside." Elias picked up his mailbag. Before he left, he looked at the photograph one more time. Clara was still looking toward the forest. But now Elias noticed something he had missed before. Behind Clara, in the dark window of the inn, there was another figure. A man. Standing outside. Watching the people in the photograph. Elias moved closer. "Who is that?" The old woman looked at the photograph. Her face suddenly changed. She whispered, "That is the man who came before the storm." Elias turned toward her. "Who was he?" The woman stared at the photograph. "I never learned his name." Then, she added quietly, "But Clara did." Elias looked at the letter in his hand. He suddenly understood that the letter was not asking him to deliver a message. It was leading him somewhere. And somewhere in Pine Hollow, someone was still waiting for him. Outside, the yellow light appeared again. This time, it was directly outside the inn. It moved slowly across the snow, then stopped beneath the upstairs window. Elias watched it through a narrow gap in the curtain. The light remained there, waiting. The old woman saw it too. She whispered one final warning. "Whatever happens tonight, Elias, do not follow the lantern." Part 5. The Forgotten Winter. Elias did not sleep. He lay awake in the small room beside the fireplace, listening to the storm outside. The wind moved around the old inn. Snow struck the windows. The wooden walls creaked from time to time. But the strangest sound came from upstairs. Nothing. There were no footsteps. No voices. No knocks. Only silence. Elias turned onto his side. His eyes remained open. The letter was on the small table beside his bed. He had placed the envelope there before lying down. For several minutes, he stared at it. Then, he reached for his pocket watch. It was nearly midnight. He slowly sat up. The room was warm, but he felt cold. He walked toward the window. The curtain was still closed. He remembered the old woman's warning. Do not follow the lantern. Elias had no intention of doing so. He only wanted to see whether the light was still there. He moved the curtain slightly. Outside, the snow was falling heavily. The settlement was almost impossible to see. But beneath the upstairs window, the yellow lantern was still burning. It had not moved. Elias stared at it. Then something strange happened. The light went out. For a moment, the entire settlement disappeared into darkness. Then the lantern appeared again. But this time, it was farther away, near the old church. Elias stepped back from the window. He did not understand how it had moved so quickly. Then he heard a sound behind him. A soft knock. Elias turned. The door to his room was slightly open. He was certain he had closed it. He walked toward it. "Mrs. Carter?" No answer. He opened the door. The hallway was empty. The fireplace downstairs was still burning. But the old woman was gone. Elias walked down the stairs. "Mrs. Carter?" Still nothing. He looked toward the front door. It was locked. Then he noticed something on the dining table. An old wooden box. He had not seen it earlier. He walked closer. The box was small. Its surface was covered with scratches. On the lid was the same pine tree symbol he had seen on the letter. Elias opened it. Inside were several old papers, a photograph, a small brass key, and a folded newspaper. Elias picked up the newspaper first. The paper was yellow and brittle. At the top was a date, December 15th, 1878. He unfolded it carefully. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearance in Pine Hollow." Elias began reading. The article reported that 32 residents of Pine Hollow had disappeared during a severe winter storm. No bodies had been found. No survivors had been located. The settlement had been abandoned. Authorities had searched the area for several weeks, but they had found almost nothing. Elias continued reading. Then he saw a sentence that made him stop. One young girl, Clara Carter, was believed to have left a letter before the disappearance. Elias looked at the letter beside him. His heart began beating faster. He read the next paragraph. According to witnesses, Clara had become convinced that a strange light was appearing in the forest every night. She believed the light was connected to an unknown man who had arrived in Pine Hollow shortly before the storm. Elias slowly lowered the newspaper. The man in the photograph. The man standing behind Clara. He continued reading. The stranger was never identified. Elias turned the page. There was another article. This one was shorter. Searchers found a trail of footprints leading from the village toward the old church. The trail ended suddenly near the church entrance. No footprints were found beyond that point. Elias stared at the words. The same thing had happened tonight. The footprints he had seen on the forest road had simply stopped. He looked toward the window. The lantern near the church was still burning. Elias picked up the brass key from the box. A small number was engraved on it. 17. He turned it over. On the back were two letters. CC. Clara Carter. Elias placed the key in his pocket. Then he picked up the photograph. It showed Clara standing outside the inn. The same photograph that hung above the fireplace. But this one was different. There was writing on the back. Elias turned it over. A sentence had been written in faded ink. The light does not belong to the dead. Elias read it again. Then again. He did not understand. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Elias looked toward the staircase. The old woman still had not returned. He called her name. Mrs. Carter? Nothing. Then he heard a soft sound. A door opening. Elias looked up. The sound had come from the second floor. He remembered the old woman's warning. There is one room upstairs you must never enter. Elias knew he should stay downstairs. He knew it. But the brass key was still in his pocket. Number 17. And somewhere upstairs? There had to be a room numbered 17. He walked toward the staircase. One step. Then another. The old wooden stairs creaked beneath his weight. The hallway upstairs was dark. Only a small amount of moonlight entered through the windows. Elias walked slowly. Room after room passed him. 10, 11, 12, then 13. The hallway continued. 14, 15, 16. Elias stopped. At the end of the hallway was one final door. There was no number on it, but a small brass plate had been nailed beneath the handle. Elias looked closer. The plate was shaped like a pine tree. His hand moved toward the brass key. Then he heard a voice behind him. Elias. He froze. It was the old woman's voice. He turned around. She was standing at the other end of the hallway. Her face was pale. Her eyes were filled with fear. Put the key away, she whispered. Elias looked at the door. What is inside? The woman shook her head. That room has been locked since 1878. Why? She looked at the key in his hand. Because Clara locked it herself. Elias stared at her. Why would she do that? The old woman took a slow breath. Because she was trying to keep something inside. The wind suddenly shook the windows. The lights in the hallway flickered. Then, from behind the locked door, came a soft sound. A girl's voice. Elias. He stopped breathing. The old woman closed her eyes. The voice came again. This time, it was clearer. Elias Morgan. He looked at the old woman. She whispered, "Do not answer." Elias remained silent. Then the voice behind the door said something that made his blood run cold. "Your letter is not for me." A pause. Then the voice continued. "It is for the man who is coming behind you." Elias slowly turned. The hallway behind him was empty. But at the bottom of the staircase, someone was standing in the darkness. A tall figure, completely still, watching him. Elias raised the lantern. The figure disappeared. The hallway was empty again. The old woman whispered, "Now you understand why I told you not to follow the light." Elias looked at the locked room, then at the dark staircase, and finally, at the letter in his hand. For the first time, he realized something. He had not come to Pine Hollow to deliver the letter. The letter had brought him here for another reason. And whatever had happened in the winter of 1878 was beginning to happen again. Part 6. The Cabin Beyond the Forest. Elias remained at the top of the stairs. He did not move. The hallway was silent again. The dark figure at the bottom of the stairs had disappeared. But Elias could still feel that someone had been there. The old woman slowly walked toward him. "Come downstairs," she whispered. Elias looked at the locked door. "What is inside that room?" The woman stopped. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she answered, "Everything we tried to forget." Elias looked at the brass key in his hand. "Who is the man in the photograph?" The old woman lowered her eyes. "I don't know." "You said Clara knew him." "She did." "Then tell me what she knew." The woman took a slow breath. Clara believed the man lived beyond the forest. Elias remembered the footprints, the lantern, the old road. Where? There was a cabin. Where is it? The woman looked toward the window. Beyond the northern ridge. How far? About 2 miles. Elias looked at the storm outside. And you expect me to go there tonight? No. The answer came immediately. You must never go there. Elias stared at her. Why? Because that is where Clara went the night before everyone disappeared. Elias became silent. The old woman continued. She followed the light. Just like I did. Yes. What happened when she reached the cabin? The woman looked at him. She came back different. Elias frowned. Different how? She stopped speaking. For how long? 3 days. And then? She wrote the letter. Elias looked down at the envelope. To me? The old woman nodded. But she could not have known me. No. Then why was my name on it? The woman shook her head. That is the part one never understood. The fire downstairs suddenly crackled loudly. Both of them looked toward the staircase. Then came another sound. A faint bell. From outside. One soft note. The old woman closed her eyes. It is back. Elias walked toward the window. He looked through the glass. The yellow lantern was no longer near the church. It was moving through the settlement. Slowly. One building at a time. Elias watched it pass the old blacksmith shop. Then the general store. Then the empty houses. Finally, it stopped near the northern edge of the settlement. The old woman stood beside him. That is the road to the cabin. Elias turned toward her. What happened to Clara after she wrote the letter? The woman did not answer. Mrs. Carter? She looked at him. She disappeared. Elias felt a chill. When? The same night as everyone else. So the letter was written before she disappeared. Yes. And she somehow knew I would find it 19 years later. The woman shook her head. No. She looked toward the lantern. She knew someone would find it. Elias frowned. What do you mean? The old woman pointed toward the letter. Look at the handwriting again. Elias unfolded the paper. He studied the letters carefully. The handwriting was elegant. But there was something unusual about it. The ink had faded in some places. He turned the paper over. There was another line. He had not noticed it before. It was written very faintly at the bottom. Do not trust the keeper of the light. Elias looked at the old woman. She saw the words. Her face became completely expressionless. Elias slowly folded the letter. You knew about this. The woman said nothing. You knew this message was there. Still nothing. Who is the keeper of the light? The woman looked toward the window. Then she whispered, I was afraid you would ask. Elias waited. The woman finally said, The man in the forest. Elias remembered the figure he had seen at the bottom of the stairs. Is he the same man from the photograph? Yes. Who is he? The woman looked at him. No one knows. The bell sounded again. This time, it came from much closer. Elias walked toward the front door. The woman grabbed his arm. Where are you going? To the cabin. No. I need answers. You will find none there. Then why did Clara go? The woman released his arm. Her eyes filled with sadness. Because she believed she could bring everyone home. Elias stopped. Everyone? The woman nodded. The people who disappeared. You think they are still alive? I don't know. Elias looked at the dark forest. The storm had become stronger. Snow was blowing across the settlement. But the yellow lantern was still visible. It was waiting at the edge of the forest. Elias picked up his coat. The old woman watched him. You are making a mistake. Perhaps. You may not come back. Elias paused. Then he looked at her. If Clara left that letter for someone, I need to know why. The woman said nothing. Elias walked outside. The cold immediately struck his face. His horse stood near the inn. It was restless. Elias attached the old lantern to the saddle. The moment he did, the flame inside it appeared. A small yellow flame. Elias stepped back. He had not lit it. The lantern was burning by itself. The horse suddenly became calm. Elias stared at the flame. Then he looked toward the forest. The lantern's light seemed brighter in that direction, as if it were pointing the way. Elias mounted the horse. He looked back at the inn. The old woman stood in the doorway. "Elias," she called. He stopped. She looked frightened. "If you reach the cabin, do not enter if the door is open." Elias frowned. "Why?" She answered quietly. "Because Clara never left it open." Elias looked toward the forest again. The lantern flickered. Then the horse began walking. The road to the northern ridge was almost completely buried. Elias followed the faint trail. The forest swallowed him. For nearly 20 minutes, he rode without seeing anything. Then he heard a sound. A distant voice. It sounded like a woman singing. Very softly. Elias stopped. The voice came from somewhere ahead. He listened. The words were impossible to understand. But the melody was gentle. Almost like a lullaby. The sound continued for several seconds. Then stopped. Elias moved forward. Soon, he saw a small wooden cabin between the trees. Smoke rose from its chimney. Elias stopped the horse. Someone was inside. A warm light glowed behind the windows. He looked at the lantern hanging from his saddle. Its flame was perfectly still. Elias slowly climbed down. He walked toward the cabin. There were footprints leading to the front door, but none leading away. He stood on the porch. His hand moved toward the door. Then he remembered the old woman's warning. "Do not enter if the door is open." Elias looked down. The door was slightly open. Only a few inches. Warm light spilled through the gap. He stepped back. Then, from inside the cabin, someone whispered his name. "Elias." He froze. The voice was familiar. It was the voice of the young girl from upstairs. "Clara." Then she spoke again. "Please come inside." Elias stared at the open door. The wind moved through the trees behind him. Snow began falling harder. And somewhere deep in the forest, a small bell rang 3 times. Elias knew he had reached the place where the story of Pine Hollow had truly begun. But he still did not know one thing. Who was waiting for him inside the cabin? Part 7. The Man Who Never Returned. Elias stood outside the cabin. The door remained slightly open. Warm light spilled across the snow-covered porch. For several seconds, he did not move. He could hear the wind behind him. He could hear the soft breathing of his horse. But from inside the cabin, there was complete silence. Elias looked at the doorway again. "Clara?" No answer. He remembered the old woman's warning. "If the door is open, do not enter." Elias took one step backward. Then another. Suddenly, the lantern beside his saddle went out. The forest became completely dark. Elias turned toward his horse. The animal had raised its head. It was staring beyond the cabin. Elias followed its gaze. Someone was standing among the trees. A tall man. He wore a long, dark coat. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of a wide hat. He did not move. He simply watched Elias. Elias reached for the lantern. The moment his fingers touched it, the flame returned. The man disappeared. Elias looked in every direction. Nothing. Only trees. He took a slow breath. Then he heard the cabin door close behind him. Elias turned. The door was now completely shut. He walked toward it. Before he could touch the handle, he heard a voice from inside. "Do not open it." Elias stopped. The voice was different from Clara's. It was a man's voice. Low. Calm. Almost tired. Elias stepped back. "Who are you?" There was no answer. He waited. Then the voice spoke again. "You should never have brought the letter here." Elias looked at the envelope inside his coat. "How do you know about the letter?" Silence. "Who wrote it?" No answer. Elias looked around the forest. Then he said, "Are you the man from the photograph?" The door remained silent. Finally, the voice replied, "Yes." Elias felt a chill. "What is your name?" The man answered, "Samuel Reed." Elias knew the name. He had heard it before, but not from Pine Hollow. He had seen it in an old newspaper. A search party had been organized in 1878. One of the men who joined the search was named Samuel Reed. He had entered Pine Hollow. He had never returned. Elias remembered the article. The search had ended after 3 days. Samuel Reed had disappeared without a trace. Elias looked at the cabin. "You were part of the search party." "Yes." "Then how are you still here?" The voice became quiet. "I am not." Elias stared at the door. "What does that mean?" The answer came slowly. "It means I never came back." Elias felt his stomach tighten. He stepped away from the cabin. "What happened here?" The man did not answer. Elias continued. "What happened to the people of Pine Hollow?" For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Then Samuel spoke. "They followed the light." Elias looked toward the forest. "The yellow light?" "Yes." "Where did it lead them?" "To a place beneath the mountain." Elias frowned. "There is no mine here." "There was never a mine." "Then what is beneath the mountain?" Samuel was silent. Elias waited. Finally, he heard a quiet sound. A door opening somewhere inside the cabin. But the front door remained closed. Elias looked at the windows. A shadow moved behind the curtain. "Samuel?" No answer. Then Clara's voice returned. "Elias, you must leave." Elias stepped closer to the door. "Clara, where are you?" "I am not inside." Elias froze. "What?" "I am not inside the cabin." "Then where are you?" The voice became softer. "Behind you." Elias slowly turned. There was no one there, only the snow-covered forest. But the yellow light had returned. It stood between 2 pine trees, and beside it was the tall man, Samuel Reed. This time, Elias could see his face. He looked much older than the man in the photograph. His skin was pale. His eyes were tired. And there was something deeply sad about his expression. Samuel raised one hand. He pointed toward the ground. Elias looked down. A narrow line had appeared in the snow. It stretched from his feet toward the forest. Then it continued beneath the trees. "A path." Samuel spoke. "Follow the line." Elias looked at him. "Where does it go?" "To the church." Elias remembered the old newspaper. The footprints had ended at the church. He looked back toward the cabin. The door was still closed. "Why should I trust you?" Samuel looked at the letter. "You should not." Elias said nothing. Samuel continued. "But you should trust Clara." "Where is she?" Samuel looked toward the trees. "She has been waiting for you for 19 years. Elias felt a strange sadness in his chest. "Why me?" Samuel's expression changed. "Because your father was here." Elias froze. "My father?" "Yes. My father never came to Pine Hollow." Samuel looked directly at him. "He did." Elias shook his head. "My father died when I was a child." "I know." "Then how could he have been here?" Samuel did not answer. Instead, he pointed toward the cabin. "Look inside." Elias turned. The front door was open again. This time, he could see the entire room. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a fireplace, and on the wall, a photograph. Elias walked closer. His heart began beating faster. The photograph showed several men standing outside Pine Hollow Church. One of them was Samuel Reed. Another man stood beside him. Elias knew that face. He had seen it in an old family photograph many times. It was his father, Thomas Morgan. Elias stopped breathing. His father was standing in Pine Hollow, and in his hand was the same yellow lantern. Elias stared at the photograph. He whispered, "What were you doing here?" Samuel's voice came from behind him. "Your father was the last man who tried to bring them home." Elias turned. Samuel was gone. The yellow light had disappeared. Only the forest remained. Then, From somewhere far away, the church bell rang. Once. Elias looked toward the sound. Then again. Twice. And a third time. 3 slow bells echoed through the snowy forest. Elias understood what he had to do. He mounted his horse. The road to the church waited ahead. And for the first time in 19 years, the mystery of Pine Hollow was beginning to reveal the truth about the man Elias had called his father. Part 8. The secret inside the letter. The church bell stopped ringing. For several moments, Elias remained beside the cabin. He could still hear the last echo fading through the forest. 3 slow notes. Then silence. Elias looked at the photograph again. His father's face stared back at him from a winter nearly 20 years in the past. Thomas Morgan. He was standing beside Samuel Reed. And in his hand was the same yellow lantern. Elias had spent most of his life believing his father had never traveled beyond their home village. Now, he knew that belief was wrong. He carefully removed the photograph from the cabin wall. On the back, there was writing. Elias held it close to the lantern. Only a few words were visible. December 13, 1878. The night before the storm. Beneath the date was another sentence. We have found the light. Elias stared at those words. Then, he remembered the letter. He took it from his coat. The paper was still warm. He unfolded it once again. For the first time, he noticed something he had missed before. There was a faint mark beneath the final sentence. It looked like a small circle. Elias held the paper closer to the lantern. The heat caused something strange to happen. A second line of writing slowly appeared beneath the original words. Elias stepped back. He had never seen invisible ink reveal itself before. He waited. More letters appeared. Slowly. 1 word at a time. Elias. Then another line. If you are reading this, then the light has found you. Elias stopped breathing. He continued. Do not go to the church alone. He looked toward the forest. The church was somewhere beyond the trees. Another sentence appeared. Your father went there 19 years ago. Elias's hands began to shake. He continued reading. He believed the people of Pine Hollow were still alive. A pause. Then another sentence. He was right. Elias stared at the page. The people were alive. Somewhere. After 19 years. That should have been impossible. But nothing about Pine Hollow seemed possible anymore. More words appeared. They are beneath the mountain. Elias looked toward the dark ridge beyond the trees. He remembered Samuel's words. A place beneath the mountain. The old mining town had never had a mine. So what was beneath it? The writing continued. The church is the entrance. Elias looked toward the distant bell tower. Then came the final message. But the door can only be opened by someone carrying the Morgan name. Elias lowered the letter. His father had known. His father had gone to the church. And now the letter had brought Elias here. He folded the paper carefully. Then he looked at the horse. We are going to the church. The horse remained calm. Elias mounted. He followed the faint trail through the forest. Snow continued to fall. The trees slowly opened. Ahead, the church tower appeared through the darkness. It looked older than any building Elias had ever seen. The roof was covered in snow. The wooden walls were dark. One window was broken. And the church bell hung high above the entrance. Elias stopped his horse. There were footprints in front of the church. Fresh footprints. Elias climbed down. He examined them. They belonged to several people. Men, women, children. At least 20 sets of footprints. All of them led toward the church. None came back. Elias looked at the church doors. They were closed. He walked toward them. As he reached the steps, the yellow lantern beside his saddle began to glow brighter. The church doors opened. Slowly. Elias froze. No one was there. The doors stood open to complete darkness. A cold wind came from inside. Elias took the lantern. He stepped through the doorway. The interior of the church was covered in dust. Old wooden benches stood in rows. The walls were dark with age. At the far end was a large wooden cross. Elias walked forward. His footsteps echoed. He looked around. Everything appeared abandoned. Then he noticed something. A small table stood beside the altar. On it was a book. Elias approached. The cover was black. A name was written on it. Thomas Morgan. Elias touched the book. His hand trembled. He opened it. The first page contained a date. December 14, 1878. Below it was his father's handwriting. Elias recognized it immediately. He had seen that handwriting many times as a child. The entry began. I came here tonight because Clara told me the truth. Elias turned the page. The people are not dead. Another page. They are trapped beneath the mountain. Another. Samuel tried to reach them. He never returned. Elias turned another page. The next sentence made him stop. The light is not a warning. It is a guide. Elias looked at the yellow lantern. Its flame burned quietly. He continued reading. But there is something else in the mountain. The next page was torn. Only a few words remained. It knows our names. Elias slowly closed the book. Then he heard something. A soft sound beneath the floor. Tap, tap, tap. He looked down. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. Elias moved toward the center of the church. The wooden floor creaked beneath his boots. He placed the lantern on the floor. The yellow light revealed something unusual. A long wooden panel. There were scratches around its edges. Elias knelt. He touched the panel. It moved slightly. A hidden door. He remembered the letter. The church is the entrance. Elias pulled the panel upward. A dark staircase descended beneath the church. Cold air rose from below. Elias looked down. The stairs disappeared into darkness. Then, from somewhere beneath the church, he heard a voice. A young girl's voice. Elias. He froze. It was Clara. She spoke again. Your father is waiting. Elias looked at the dark staircase. He knew he should turn back. But he had already come too far. He picked up the lantern. Then, he stepped onto the first stair. The wooden step creaked beneath his weight. He descended slowly. One step. Then another. The darkness swallowed the church behind him. And as Elias disappeared beneath the floor, the church doors slowly closed. Outside, the snow continued to fall. And high above the empty settlement, the old bell began to move again. Part 9. The people beneath the mountain. The staircase seemed to have no end. Elias descended slowly. The yellow lantern in his hand cast a small circle of light around him. The air became colder with every step. Above him, the church disappeared into darkness. He could no longer hear the wind. He could no longer hear the snow. There was only silence. And the quiet sound of his own breathing. Elias counted the steps. 20, 30, 40. At the 50th step, the staircase finally ended. His boots touched stone. Elias raised the lantern. A narrow tunnel stretched ahead. The walls were made of rough rock. Old wooden beams supported the ceiling. He moved forward carefully. The tunnel smelled of damp earth. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. Drip, drip, drip. Elias continued. After several minutes, he saw something on the wall. A name. Carved into the stone. Clara Carter. Elias stopped. Beneath it were dozens of other names. Men. Women. Children. 32 names in total. The people of Pine Hollow. Elias touched the stone. The carvings looked old. But some of them were strangely clean. As if someone had traced them recently. Then he noticed something else. Beside every name was a small mark. A circle. The same symbol that had appeared on Clara's letter. Elias stepped back. What is this place? A voice answered from the darkness. Home. Elias froze. He raised the lantern. Someone was standing at the end of the tunnel. A young woman. She wore a long white dress. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders. She looked exactly like the girl in the photograph. Elias whispered, Clara? The woman smiled faintly. Yes. Elias could not speak. She looked 17 years old. Exactly as she had looked in the photograph. Not 19 years older. Not even 1 day older. Elias slowly walked toward her. You wrote the letter. Yes. But you disappeared in 1878. I did. How are you still 17? Clara looked down the tunnel. Time does not move here the way it does above. Elias felt a chill. Where are the others? Clara turned. Come with me. She walked deeper into the tunnel. Elias followed. The tunnel widened. Then suddenly, the darkness opened into a huge underground chamber. Elias stopped. His mouth fell open. There were houses. Small wooden houses. Dozens of them. Built beneath the mountain. Warm yellow lights glowed from their windows. Smoke rose from small chimneys. People were walking through the streets. Men. Women. Children. Elias recognized some of their faces from the photograph. The people of Pine Hollow. They were alive. Still exactly as they had been in 1878. Elias whispered, "It's impossible." Clara looked at him. "Many things are." A man walked past them. He looked at Elias. Then stopped. His face became pale. "Thomas's boy." Elias turned. The man stared at him. "You look just like your father." Elias felt tears rise in his eyes. "My father was here." The man nodded. "He came for us." "Where is he?" The man looked toward the center of the underground town. "He is waiting." Elias followed his gaze. At the far end of the chamber stood a large wooden house. A warm light burned in one window. Elias began walking toward it. Clara followed beside him. "Why did my father leave?" "He didn't." Elias stopped. "What?" Clara looked at him. "Your father never left Pine Hollow." Elias stared at her. "But I was told he died." Clara shook her head. "He did not die." "Then where is he?" Clara pointed toward the house. "He is inside." Elias walked faster. His heart was beating hard. He climbed the wooden steps. The door opened before he touched it. A man stood inside. Older. Tired. But unmistakable. Elias stopped. He knew that face. He had seen it in his dreams. His father's eyes. His father's voice. The man looked at him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the man whispered, "Elias." Elias's eyes filled with tears. "Father?" Thomas Morgan stepped forward. His face showed both happiness and sadness. "You should never have come here." Elias shook his head. "You sent the letter." Thomas looked confused. "No." Elias took the letter from his coat. Thomas stared at it. Then his face became pale. "I didn't write that." Elias froze. "But Clara said." Clara wrote the first letter. Thomas pointed toward the paper. "But that handwriting is not hers." Elias looked down. Suddenly, the truth became clear. The letter had two different handwritings. One belonged to Clara. The other belonged to someone else. Thomas whispered. The second part was written by him. Elias looked up. "Who?" Thomas did not answer. Instead, he looked toward the entrance of the underground town. The yellow lantern was burning there. A tall figure stood beside it. Samuel Reed. But Samuel was not alone. Behind him stood dozens of people. People Elias had never seen before. Men, women, children, all of them completely silent. Thomas grabbed Elias's arm. "We have to leave." "Why?" "Because they know you are here." "Who?" Thomas looked toward the darkness. "The ones who were never part of Pine Hollow." The lantern suddenly went out. Every light in the underground town disappeared. Complete darkness filled the chamber. Then a voice echoed through the tunnels. A deep voice. Cold. Almost human. "Thomas Morgan." Thomas closed his eyes. The voice spoke again. "Your son has finally come home." Elias felt his father's hand tighten around his arm. Then, somewhere in the darkness, the church bell rang. But they were hundreds of feet beneath the mountain. And this time, it rang 4 times. Crescent moon, the last light at Pine Hollow, 1897. Part 10, The Last Light. The fourth bell echoed through the underground chamber. Elias stood beside his father. Neither of them moved. The sound slowly disappeared into the darkness. Then, somewhere far away, a single light appeared. A small yellow flame. It floated in the darkness. Thomas looked at it. His face became pale. It's time. Elias looked at him. Time for what? To finish what I started. Thomas took the old lantern from Elias's hand. The moment he touched it, the flame became brighter. Clara appeared behind them. Thomas. He turned. Clara's expression was calm. You promised you would never light it again. Thomas looked at Elias. I had no choice. Clara walked closer. There is always a choice. Thomas shook his head. Not anymore. Elias looked between them. Tell me the truth. Thomas remained silent. Why did you stay here? Thomas finally answered. Because someone had to keep the door closed. What door? Thomas pointed toward the far end of the underground town. There was a massive stone wall there. Elias had not noticed it before. In the center of the wall was a large wooden door. The same pine tree symbol was carved into it. Thomas continued. Behind that door is the reason Pine Hollow disappeared. Elias stared at the door. What is behind it? Thomas looked at Clara. She answered softly. Something that should never have been awakened. A deep sound came from behind the door. Boom. The entire chamber shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. People began moving away from the wall. Thomas grabbed Elias. We have to go. But the people. They cannot leave. Why? Thomas looked at him. Because the door knows their names. Another deep sound came from behind the wall. Boom. This time, a crack appeared across the wooden door. Elias looked at the frightened people around him. Then he understood. The entire underground settlement was a prison. They were not living here by choice. They were trapped. Thomas handed the lantern back to Elias. You must take it. Why? Because the light brought you here. And how do I get everyone out? Thomas looked toward Clara. She smiled sadly. You cannot save everyone. Elias shook his head. There must be a way. Clara pointed toward the old stone wall. There is. She walked toward the center of the chamber. Everyone became silent. Clara raised her hand. The lantern in Elias's hand suddenly became brighter. A narrow beam of yellow light moved across the stone floor. It stopped at a small iron door. Elias walked toward it. What is that? Thomas answered. The way out. Elias pulled the door open. Behind it was another staircase. This one went upward. Fresh air moved through the opening. Thomas looked at the people. Go. Slowly, the people began moving. Men, women, children. They walked toward the staircase. Clara remained behind. Elias looked at her. You're not coming? She shook her head. I belong here. No. Elias reached for her hand. You waited 19 years. She smiled. I was waiting for you. Then come with us. Clara looked toward Thomas. Thomas lowered his head. Then Clara whispered, If I leave, the door will open. Elias looked at the stone wall. The cracks were growing. He finally understood. Clara was part of the seal. She had remained beneath the mountain to keep the door closed. Thomas had stayed to protect her. And now Elias had come to finish their work. He looked at his father. What do I have to do? Thomas stepped closer. You must take the lantern to the church. The church? Yes. Why? Because that is where this began. The underground chamber shook again. The stone door began to open. A dark shadow appeared behind it. Thomas pushed Elias toward the staircase. Go. Elias grabbed his father's arm. Come with me. Thomas smiled. I can't. Father. Thomas shook his head. You came here to find me. Elias nodded. I did. Then remember me as I am now. Elias's eyes filled with tears. Thomas pushed him toward the stairs. "Go, Elias." Clara walked beside him. The people were already climbing. Elias looked back one final time. His father stood beneath the yellow light. Clara stood beside him. Behind them, the stone door was slowly opening. Then Thomas shouted, "Do not look back." Elias turned. He climbed. The staircase seemed endless. He heard the sound of the underground chamber shaking. Then came a deep roar. Elias reached the top. He pushed open the wooden panel beneath the church floor. Cold air rushed over him. Snow had stopped falling. The church was completely silent. Elias climbed out. The lantern was still burning. He placed it on the altar. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the church bell began to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped. Elias looked toward the church doors. The people of Pine Hollow were standing outside. All 32 of them. But they were different now. They looked older. Some were crying. Some were looking at the sky. They had finally returned to the world. Clara stood among them. She looked at Elias. And for the first time, she looked older. Not 17, but 36. The age she should have been. She smiled. "Thank you." Elias looked around. "Where is my father?" Clara's smile disappeared. He stayed behind. Elias understood. He looked toward the mountain. The yellow light inside the church slowly became smaller. Then it disappeared. Years later, people would say that Pine Hollow was never found again. The settlement vanished beneath the forest. No one could explain what happened. But Elias kept one thing. The old letter. He carried it with him for the rest of his life. On the back of the envelope, he eventually discovered one final sentence. He had never noticed it before. It read, "Some doors are meant to remain closed." Elias never told anyone what he had seen beneath the mountain. He simply returned to his work. He continued carrying letters. He continued traveling through winter. And whenever someone asked him why he never feared the snow, he would smile and say, "Because I once learned that even in the darkest winter, there is always a light waiting somewhere." And far away, in the northern forests of Maine, some people still tell an old story. They say that when the first snow falls each winter, a small yellow light sometimes appears between the pine trees. It never stays for long. It simply waits, as if searching for someone. And if you ever see it, you should remember the story of Pine Hollow, because not every light is meant to be followed. Some lights are only there to show you the way home.